tonight. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe during these trying times. My name is Alicia,
And I'm Junsu.
and we're part of the advocacy team in Bruin Shelter, which is hosting this event tonight. We have a variety of speakers lined up to share some of their experiences and expertise, and we're really excited for this event.
So as an organization that focuses on supporting students experiencing homelessness, Bruin Shelter realizes that in order to promote effective social justice advocacy, we must become more thoroughly educated on the issues that affect us and our community. Here, we want to shed light on food insecurity among the unhoused population in LA and how COVID-19 has exacerbated these challenges. We have some experts and community leaders in the field here with us today to help us out. I want to extend a warm thank you to these speakers for taking the time to share our event tonight. We'll start off this event with speaker introductions and then dive into some questions we have prepared for our wonderful guests. We will then open up the Q&A to you all as well. So feel free to raise your hand, send in the chat, or message us privately with any questions you have along the way. We kindly ask that you all stay muted during the introductions out of respect to our speakers.
Okay, so to start off the event, we have Asher from Hollywood Food Coalition here today. Asher, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I'm the Director of Development for the Hollywood Food Coalition. I'm a Bruin as well. I graduated 2015, so it's been a few years. And I commend you all for taking an interest in these issues as students, because I think I really didn't get very involved in the issues around homelessness and food insecurity until I graduated. So yeah, I commend you all for that. So yeah, like I said, I'm Director of Development for the Hollywood Food Coalition, and my job is really to help build the relationships and the partnerships that really raise the resources for the organization. So, I mean, oftentimes that takes the form of financial resources, but it also takes other forms as well for a small nonprofit like the Hollywood Food Coalition. So helping bring in food donors, helping bring in clothing donors, helping bring in volunteers, that type of thing. So yeah, the Hollywood Food Coalition, just to briefly give us a summary of what we do. We have a nightly dinner where we serve really high quality, healthy meals every night of the week to about 150, 200 people. And then we also have a food sharing program called the Community Exchange, which where we distribute food to over 70 nonprofits throughout Los Angeles. And we rescue that food from a network of donors, food donors, about I think 150 donors right now. So it's really a growing program, and we've definitely seen a huge spike in need for that type of food with our nonprofit partners. And then lastly, we have a program called Community Wellness, which is really focused on providing those ancillary services outside of food. So clothing, healthcare, employment, housing. We really see food as an opportunity to connect and build long-lasting relationships with unhoused individuals, but also just any food insecure individual. So yeah, that's just a base. Those are our core 3 programs. So yeah, thanks again for hosting me here, and excited to talk some more.
Thank you, Asher. And next up, we have Brandy from HopeNet to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandy Muniz, and I'm the new Executive Director at HopeNet. I want to thank everyone for having me and for being here today. It is quite inspiring to see so many young people involved in food insecurity and housing insecurity, and to be talking about how those intersect with each other. HopeNet is a kind of a long-standing organization. We've been around in LA, the Metro Los Angeles area, for 31 years, and we provide food mostly provided from the Los Angeles Food Bank, and we disperse that among our partners, which create our food pantry program. So we have about 12 food pantries that create a 20-mile span throughout Metro Los Angeles that pass out or distribute food up to 2 times a week. So this is, pounds of food. These are hundreds of people who come consistently and rely on this food as their main food source. We are mostly a direct service organization. Our main focus is to get food out into the community, to provide it to anyone who wants it and need it. It is free. It is nutritional. We give out quality food aside from the basics like rice and beans. We also do healthy options like lean proteins, fresh produce, things like that. And again, we mostly focus on the direct services of just providing the food, and we're hoping to expand into also providing other resources and services that aim to help break those cycles of food insecurity. So I'm excited to be here to talk about that and hear all of your ideas, answer your questions, and see how other organizations are doing that too.
Thank you so much, Brandy. And lastly, we have Emily and Sarah from SPY to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Sarah Faye. I've been at SPY, or Safe Place for Youth, for a little over a year now. And Safe Place for Youth the purpose of Safe Place for Youth is to provide support through continuum of care, including extensive street outreach, access center services, case management, and we use a very individualistic and strengths-based approach. I am the campus peer navigator for SPY in the SPA 5 area, so West LA. And the purpose of my role is to basically connect college students with resources such as housing, food, shelter, etc. And I have personal lived experience with being homeless, as well as being a food insecure college student. And so I really do enjoy my role with being able to bring the perspective that I do have and being able to help the young people that I can. And then I'll go ahead and let Emily introduce herself.
Thanks, Sarah. Sarah and I don't get to work together too often, so I'm so excited to be on this panel with her and learn more from her. My name is Emily, and I'm SPY's garden program manager. So I guess to give just a brief overview, a little bit of SPY, our main thing is we have an access center in Venice where we're serving youth experiencing homelessness age 12 to 25. So in non-COVID times, our access center is a real hub of, like Sarah mentioned, this continuum of care of services. So folks definitely getting access to meals, but also showers, art classes, legal services, medical services, and then those referrals and support in housing, employment, education opportunities, all those things. Our garden program is most prominently a workforce development program. So youth work at the garden, they get paid to participate in an internship where we're gardening together, and then a huge part of it is cooking. So we see so much how a lot of folks who come and work with us at the garden haven't before had really close intimacy with a lot of these foods that we're growing, and haven't had an opportunity to develop the life skills to learn how to cook with those foods and work with them. So I feel like I get the really, really special honor of getting to witness people's love of food just grow, and watch them become inspired. So yeah, that's a bit of what we're doing. And, we, of course, to partner with the food bank and whatnot to distribute foods to our various housing sites and whatnot. But I would say certainly my approach and hope is always to be guided by an ethic of food sovereignty, like expanding even beyond food security. Like I want people to not only be food secure, I want them to have agency and decision-making power around what foods they have access to. So maybe I'll have an opportunity to talk more about that later in the panel, but I'll leave it at that for now. And thank you everyone for organizing this, and yeah, eager to hear what other panelists share too.
All right, thank you all so much for sharing today. And to start off the Q&A session, we have some poll questions for you all to answer to get you guys thinking about the current statistics around food insecurity. All right, so here are the results of the poll, and yeah, sorry. Hopefully that got y'all thinking about some of the statistics and the unfortunate reality of food insecurity, as well as some of the misconceptions surrounding this overlooked topic. So now we're gonna transition into the Q&A.
All right, so we're gonna go into the Q&A. Feel free to type a question in the chat or raise your hand, and you can unmute yourself when we call your name. And yeah, so feel free to start asking questions if you have any. Okay, so since I don't see any coming up right now, we'll start with a few questions that I have. The first question being, what's the biggest challenge you've faced in combating food insecurity within the unhoused population?
I'm happy to jump in and start us off, break the ice a little bit. I think a huge challenge, particularly with the unhoused population and with folks who don't have stable shelter, is just getting stuck in a cycle where you're just constantly relying on food distribution programs. So really getting stuck in like relying on food banks, food distribution, and then right, that's like highlighting that lack of kind of decision-making power and whatnot. Maybe people don't have access to a kitchen or the proper utensils to prepare certain foods. So yeah, I guess the thing that comes to mind is just getting stuck in that cycle. If you're not making an income or don't have a stable place to stay, you're kind of just stuck in that loop. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now. Sarah, it looks like wants to share.
So I'll just share a little bit about my own personal experience with being homeless, and just one of the biggest problems that I had was when I was living in my car. It was how the food was offered. So for example, at the food pantry at West LA College, they have a bunch of canned foods, canned goods. Well, when I go back to my car, that canned good is like really like useless to me in a sense, because like no can opener, no, you know, place to lay out the food or anything like that. Most of the time that stuff has to be cooked, or, you know, not just the best right out of the can, you know what I mean? So one of the things that I've been trying to brainstorm are ways to make the food more accessible to the homeless population in a way that they can, no matter what environment they're in, you know, they'll be able to consume it, rather than having to like waste it, throw it away, or get a hotel room, or like hope that they have a friend or somewhere to go to make the food, you know what I mean? And then a lot of the times, a lot of students just rely on fast food and stuff, you know, which is like very unhealthy, and it gets pretty tiring pretty quickly. So I'll stop there. Thank you guys.
I'll kind of piggyback too on what Sarah and Emily have touched on. So there is, you know, a cycle of food insecurity, and when we're serving those who are experiencing homelessness, there's that immediate need, like Sarah mentioned, that if you don't have the proper utensils like a can opener or a stove or even the proper storage, you know, Sarah had her car, but if we're thinking about people who are living on the streets, you know, where do they store food? How much can they store? There's a very limited amount of what they can receive and then what they can keep on them. So there's that immediate need of what they're capable of taking and receiving, which then lends to the long-term need or challenge, right? Since there's a cycle of food insecurity, those experiencing homelessness can only accept things like canned goods. If they can't accept fruit, let's say apples, how many apples can they actually keep with them that's not weighing them down, that don't go to waste if they can't store them? So they are mostly stuck to using canned goods, maybe some like sealed meats, things like tuna, for example. All these are a much more processed food, so that then leads to a more unhealthy diet, which contributes to that cycle, right? Of then now you're facing mental and physical health issues based on that diet. So it just is a perpetuating cycle that continues itself. And then pair that with the cycle of homelessness, it's very difficult for people to be able to get out of that.
Yeah, just going off that for just briefly, I think definitely one of the biggest challenges that we've observed for food insecurity is just getting the right food to the right people. Um, it's not difficult to find people who want to donate food, right? Because food waste is just so prevalent. Restaurants, grocery stores, they all have food waste, but it's just really like I think like Sarah was saying, getting that food that a grocery store wants to donate, if they want to donate produce, to the person who can use that produce best, which is really what we tried to do with the Hollywood Food Coalition with that exchange program, is really just centralize the donations from all these food donors, so you can kind of organize it, sort it, and get it to the people who can best use it. If they have a kitchen, you can get them food that they can cook, but if they don't have that, definitely getting them prepared meals, things like that. So I definitely agree with the other panelists that it's really just a challenge to get the right food to the right people.
Thank you so much for sharing your guys' insights. I just realized we forgot to share the correct answers to the poll question, so I'm gonna do that real quick. So for the question, what is the percentage of food waste in America every year? The answer was 40%. And then for how many millions of children live in food insecure households, there's 11 million children. And then food insecurity is linked to higher rates of obesity. And then finally, how many millions of Americans face hunger every day? It's 54 million. So that's a lot of people. And then I'll let Catherine and Katie go on with the Q&A.
Yeah, so this is a question from the chat from Christy, who asks, what services help break the cycle of food insecurity?
I can jump on that. So there's, I think, kind of two levels to that. There's the immediate need, which I think everyone kind of gets stuck in, right? Where if someone's hungry, you want to provide food so they're no longer hungry. But to end food insecurity itself, to get someone out of that cycle where they're relying on food banks or they don't have enough food, it is multi-pronged and it is quite extensive. It's connecting people to other food programs, it's increasing nutritional standards, meal plans, screening for level of food insecurity, even intervening in like with doctors and healthcare providers, and securing other food providers. It's quite extensive. It's essentially like a wraparound service to end food insecurity, increasing employment for people who may not have enough funds to purchase food, educational efforts on food, quite a bit. And then there's even a food waste a component which was brought up in the survey. So there is quite a bit that goes into ending that food cycle, food insecurity cycle. And we at HopeNet, again, we mostly focus on just providing the food, with the goal is to expand into creating other resources and services, which some of our pantries do currently do. We have one pantry, the Karsh Center. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but they provide, they have like dental care, they have legal support, they have medical support. There's quite a few of resources that people can access at that one pantry.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, I mean, food security, like homelessness, is really just a symptom of a broader societal problem, right? We're not going to stop having food insecure people until there's a fair distribution of resources, right? If we get, it really is just the fact that like people just don't have the resources. And I mean, when you look at a city like Los Angeles specifically, as to why there is that, I mean, of course, in this country, we have those divides, right? But just in the city alone, like historically, there's been a disproportionate allocation of resources, right? Where the central part of the city has really been starved for economic resources, and the outlying areas have gotten a lot more. And so that's why you see like a lot more food insecure individuals. I mean, definitely everywhere in the city and county have food insecurity, but you see a huge prevalence in the center of the city. And so really, I mean, to not have any more food insecure people in the city, you would have to have basically individuals would just have to have enough resources, right, to keep themselves in housing, to get all those resources that Brandy was describing, right, like healthcare and all those things. I mean, those are all just symptoms of like not having enough resources, which unfortunately, like I can't imagine we'll ever solve that problem in the next decade, but of course we're all working very hard to do so.
I would love to add, I just echo everything that both Brandy and Asher have shared, and wanted to share as well just some language that I'm hearing in discussions around food justice that I feel like would be useful here. Asher highlighted how there are these parts of the city that are more hit by food insecurity than other parts of the city, and it makes me think of the term that is very common, food desert. And want to highlight that because there are folks now who are saying that food desert is not accurate language because a desert is naturally occurring in the landscape. And a food desert is a region that has low or no access to fresh, affordable, nutritious food. And that is not naturally occurring. That's a human-made issue. And there are some, because my background is more in farming, there are some folks farming in upstate New York, some Black farmers who have started using the language of food apartheid to describe that human-made disparity. And yeah, I find that really useful and wanted to share it here because it feels relevant to the conversation.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of it really has to do with not just on the level of society, but it has a lot to do with policy as well, because the policy holds back a lot of the steps that we could be taking to help solve this crisis, and whether that's in homelessness or food insecurity. And it's not that we don't have, I mean, the resources are there. It's just like the money, I feel like the financial distribution is disproportioned across the board. And that's where we really have the hiccup, is because those funds are not going to the right places. They're going to the wrong people. And they get, that's how the rich stay rich and the poor get poor. So it's kind of like, it just feels like it was kind of made that way for whatever reason. But that's all I wanted to share.
It was definitely made that way to serve capitalism and white supremacy. Yeah.
Sort of going off of that, this is a question from Michelle in the chat, and it's how do you evaluate the prevalence of food insecurity in a particular area? And somewhat related to that, how do you assess the extent of food insecurity an individual might be facing?
I'll just share.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Asher.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as just from an individual basis, people can only help as much as somebody is willing to share about themselves. And the thing about food insecurity is not only is it very stigmatized, but it's it kind of goes down to a deeper level within one person's self to be able to like admit like, hey, I don't have enough money to get myself some food. Like, you know, can you get me something to eat or something like that? It's hard for people to really break past that point because of all the stigma that comes around it and all the judgment and everything else, aside from the ego and all that. And so for me, it's like kind of eliminating that stigma and being able to make people feel more comfortable with sharing about their insecurities. That way we would have more of a realistic look at the numbers of who it is that actually has this, or is experiencing this crisis and has these challenges that they're going through. And you know, like for example, when I applied for EBT, I believe it was about a year ago, as a college student, mind you, as a homeless college student that works part-time, you know, they awarded me $10 as a one-time payment and said I would have a $0 monthly allotment after that. That's crazy. Like, the EBT should be there for people that are in need. How are you going to tell me I'm not in need when I'm homeless? I'm telling you I'm hungry. I don't have money for food, you know? So I think that's another one of the big issues is allowing or changing just the way that that system works, because it's very unfair. And you know, they kind of just told me over the phone like, hey, we expect you to spend your money that you get from work on the food that you need to eat. It's like, what about my home? I still don't have one of those, but you know, okay, all right, I'll spend it on food, like, because you guys aren't helping. And that should be another thing that is advocated for, you know, throughout at least LA County, for our students and other homeless individuals and whatnot, because it's definitely a big thing and it's very impactful. It makes a huge difference when you do have that extra $200 a month for food, and then you don't have to necessarily worry about as much with wasting it, because you can buy it on an as need basis, you know. And that was another problem with like food banks, is you go to a food bank and like I said, it's the same issue of canned goods or produce that ends up going bad before we can eat it, and it just repeats the cycle. So it's definitely it's a tough situation. Go ahead, Asher.
Yeah, and this kind of relates to what Sarah was saying as well, with her own like lived personal experience. There's an interesting USC study that just came out, which was looking at rent burden, right, and the relation between rent burden and accessing other services. And they found that that individuals with a high amount of rent burden, so spend 30% more of their income on rent, were less likely, or were more likely to defer purchases for food, healthcare. So in terms of tracking thing, I mean, I think all these things are very interrelated, and you can probably easily track it by just looking at where is poverty concentrated, where are people struggling to pay rent, where are people struggling to pay for healthcare. It does seem to all be pretty easily trackable in that sense. That being said, I do think, and this is like another challenge that we all face, kind of, is how do you food insecurity. I mean, one face of food insecurity is, yes, the unhoused population that you see when you in your neighborhood, right? But there's also a large proportion of the food insecure population which is housed, right, and who have housing, who have jobs, and they're very, very hidden. So it's very difficult to even I guess quantify food insecurity in that sense, because it's pretty much everywhere, right? And it's kind of unquantifiable because you can't really count every individual.
And the Los Angeles Public Health Department also tracks food insecurity. They do that through their partnering resources. They're partners, excuse me, who, like HopeNet, we collect data on how many people we give away food to, and all of their other departments using the food bank. And for our area, the Metro Los Angeles area, HopeNet, it is ranked the number 5 in food insecurity, and number 1 in very low food insecurity. So the USDA defines those as low food security reports reduction in quality, variety, or desirability of diet with little to no indication or reduced food intake, or very low food insecurity, which reports of multiple indications of disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. So the numbers are increasing. The Metro Los Angeles area just went from number 4 to number 5 in food insecurity. So that's going down, but we still rank the number 1 in very low food insecurity. And like Asher said, it is quite difficult to get an accurate number for that when there are plenty of people who fit into those 2 categories who aren't reporting it.
Thank you guys so much for sharing, and especially Sarah for sharing her story. It's really empowering to hear your guys' experiences and ideas. So going on to another question, more specific to our current situation, in what ways has COVID-19 impacted food access among the unhoused population?
I think, I guess just briefly, I think COVID has, I mean, there have definitely been, there's been a lot more people who have fallen into poverty, right? Who become food insecure, rent burdened, but I think COVID as well has just revealed the extent of the precarity of a lot of people's situations. And so I think it's definitely gone up, but we've also kind of just realized that the loss of a job, right, which a lot of people lost their jobs during the pandemic, right? The loss of a job automatically makes many people in this city food insecure, healthcare insecure, all of these things. So I think it definitely has become worse. But I mean, that USC study I mentioned was conducted in 2019. So pre-pandemic, these things were happening were happening quite a bit.
Yeah, COVID-19 has just, like everywhere else, increased the need. We've seen people who've never been to a food pantry in their life suddenly come to rely on it as their main food source. We've seen numbers increase 100% in the number of meals that we're giving out. And the sad thing is, like Asher also mentioned earlier, these aren't just the unhoused population. These are plenty of people, especially in California, who are making money, who do have two incomes coming into the household, sometimes very high incomes that are still food insecure. And so I think that goes back also to what Emily and Sarah said, that there also has to be a policy piece on this, because the need is so widespread, from people who have income all the way to those experiencing homelessness. But for those experiencing homeless, it's getting just more and more dire.
Yeah, I'll say overall, COVID-19 has definitely impacted everything across the board, especially the resources that are available. And when everything had shut down for a period of time, everything was up in limbo, nothing was available, accessible. And so it was difficult to access those resources. And then now I believe that it's just going to be kind of slow rolling it back out into how it was pre-pandemic. But we'll get there eventually, and hopefully better than we were before. Fingers crossed. Hopefully this pandemic was a good period of time to learn a lot of things and make a lot of mistakes and learn from them to improve systems to better serve people in the communities that we're in.
for your responses. That's very insightful to hear. This is another question from the chat from Michelle, who asks, what can pre-collegiate and collegiate institutions do to identify and directly support youth/students experiencing food insecurity?
I'll go ahead and put my input in on that a little bit. So I think that one of the best ways, well, aside from surveys and self-reported studies or questionnaires, which really get, I feel like, a good insight on that, it would be to destigmatize it a little bit or eliminate, maybe not a barrier, but making people feel a little bit more comfortable with giving their responses, is like, like offer a meal to somebody who fills out the survey, like a fresh hot meal, or like a gift card to like Subway or something like that. Just something small, not like, I'm not saying you have to give them like a $50 cash certificate or cash incentive, but because that kind of, I feel like, encourages people more to share that about themselves, and they get rewarded in the end as well. But maybe not even just that, but just explaining to them, how important it is, and, why we need these responses from them, as well as just making it more comfortable. Like I said, like, even though we had a food pantry at West LA College, it was really hard to get students to start going to it, because the students felt like, the employees or the faculty that was at the food banks, that they would be judged by them, that somehow this would impact them in the long run, or they're going to be judged, looked at differently, thought of differently, treated differently. And so that's kind of like, that was one of the things that was making it difficult, or not really giving us the true numbers of that food insecurity at, like, let's say West LA College. So just really like destigmatizing it and making students or individuals feel more comfortable with what they're going through, and also like understanding and being accepting, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sarah. And I think, looking at UCLA, right, and if you're looking what you can do in particular at UCLA, it's making the resources available. Yes, I know UCLA has a food closet, and it's gotten better over the years. I remember when I was a student, it used to be like noodles and granola bars and just nothing anyone wanted, right? So I think, like, definitely making the resources available, but also making them available in a very welcoming way, and in a variety of ways, right? Because some people are going to want to sit down and have a meal and meet people, and some people are just going to want to, for what, like Sarah said, breaking the stigma around food insecurity is not easy, right? And I think that's why a lot of people do not access the resources that are available, and is actually a really, really big issue. The issue is not necessarily that the resources don't exist in this city, but that people are just not accessing them, especially when you look at like federal programs. So I would definitely say, like, for example, the Hollywood Food Coalition, pre-pandemic, we had a seated dinner every single night. And we worked really hard to make sure it was a very welcoming environment where people could sit down, like really, really great food. Our kitchen manager, she's a former chef from Bestia and Vel, if you're all familiar with that restaurant. And they got waited on by volunteers. So just making a very, very welcoming environment where people feel like there's no shame in asking for help, but also acknowledging, that might not be the best for everyone. So presenting a variety of options in the way to access the services, but also perhaps the variety of options for food, because I think food, a big thing, right, is food is very, very personal. It's not like, healthcare is personal, yes, but it's not like healthcare in that there's I mean, there's a way to approach diabetes, right? And there's a way to approach all these diseases. But food is something that's very, very personal to you, whether you grew up eating something, or you love something, or you're a vegetarian, vegan, whatever. So just presenting a variety of options as well for people to, I think that creates a welcoming environment also.
Really quickly, I'll just add one little thing. I think it's important to make the resources that are offered just as accessible as any other resource would be to any normal person or somebody who's not insecure. So having like an aisle or a section near or in like a Ralph's, you know, so where people would normally go to get their food, having something like maybe right on the outside or inside, making it less alienating, you know, because that's kind of like what society kind of does, you know. It groups these individuals and those that are experiencing this into a very like small little corner. Just like we're gonna deal with you guys like this, or we're gonna help you guys out like this, you know. And then also like just the locations are always, well, from what I've seen most of the time, you know, they're in low income neighborhoods and communities. You know, maybe people who don't live in those communities don't really want to go there to access the food banks, you know. So just kind of making it more widespread and I just like the thought of taking it away from areas that are experiencing poverty or like the hood, you know, because if you keep relating these things to those areas, they're always going to represent those titles. Does that like, and I think like in order to grow and advance from that, you know, there needs to be like a different way to address it or speak of it. And yeah.
Thank you all for your insight. We have another chat question from Mona, and they ask, it was mentioned that there's a barrier until someone admits to themselves that they are food insecure and does not have money to buy food for themselves. How many food insecure people would you say actually go to food pantries to get food or other resources?
Not as many as there could be. I will say that. And another thing that I just remembered is a lot of the food banks have very specific times where you can go to pick up the food. And a lot of the times, especially for somebody who is food insecure, chances are, well, maybe not chances are, but you know, a lot of the people who are low income and that are facing these insecurities may not have a vehicle or means of transportation. So getting to that food bank at that time, that's early enough, because a couple years ago when I was going, it was like once a week between like 9 to 12 were the times that we would be able to go pick up food. So getting transportation there and then having to carry all that food back on a bus is like, it's crazy difficult. And so I don't think as many people as there should be go to food banks just because of the limitations such as those that are in place.
Thank you for answering that question. Was there something you'd like to add?
I was just gonna say, seen something in the chat about community gardens, and yes, we need to promote this across the board, throughout the county, the state, the world, the country. I don't know, you know, it just needs to be out there. Like, have a whole idea. Like, each little neighborhood block should just have each person could have a little plant or vegetable crop that they grow, and then every week just do an exchange. It's like super simple, super effective, super resourceful, super everything. It just works for everybody. You don't even have to go anywhere or contribute to the supermarkets and all of that, which yes, community gardens is the way to go. And I'm sure Emily has her own little portion she could share on this.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Do you want me to read the question aloud, maybe for the recording? Because I don't know if the recording will pick up the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. This is from Jeremy. What are the roles community-based initiatives like community gardens and mutual aid networks have in long-term solutions to food insecurity? And is a more effective solution advocating for expanded SNAP benefits or something similar? I definitely have, I think this is really important and interesting question. And I think it addresses something that's kind of come up in the conversation already. You know, I think earlier in the conversation, Brandy was really highlighting the immediate need that's there. And the immediate need is going to keep being there. And so we need organizations like the folks who are here today, HopeNet and Hollywood Food Coalition, who are like really addressing that immediate need of hunger. Like people are hungry today, so we need to get them food today. Meanwhile, we also need to be thinking of that long-term approach. Like how are we taking steps toward a future where people aren't wondering if they're going to be hungry that week? They know they are going to have access to food. And so I think a really multifaceted approach is, in my view and opinion, like the way to go. Like we need to be doing everything. Like we need the food banks and the food distribution, and we also need the community fridges that people can access. We also need community gardens where people are getting to grow the food that they want to be eating. And then like Sarah said, like, yeah, they should be sharing and bringing their excess to their neighbors and checking in on their neighbors. So I think definitely from my perspective, it's like everything. We need the organizations working with the state to like redirect this massive amount of excess food that we end up with in our food system. And also we need to be on the ground in our neighborhoods, building relationships and building mutual aid networks to make sure. I think that's going to be the safety net, like long-term, say we do have this world where, you know, people for the most, like food insecurity is dwindling and dwindling. It's the mutual aid networks and like close-knit relationships that we build that are going to catch when people do get hungry, because that's still going to happen. So yes, all of it is where I land.
Yeah, I think just going back to something Emily said earlier about these being problems that were created, right? I think that why we're here today is just we do not have good leaders in Los Angeles who historically, and I would say currently as well, in many, many places. And I mean, I know a lot of students here are, I don't know if you're registered to vote in the west part of LA, but I can tell you that that a lot of the politicians there have are really the same ones who have gotten us here, and they're still in office. And so I would say definitely, like, if you can all like I guess activate your communities to vote some of these people out of office and to get more community oriented individuals in office to, like other people were saying, to redistribute these resources. I do think that is one of the reasons why we don't have this change yet. So I think long term, definitely take an interest in local politics. I know like Congress is a lot more interesting sometimes, but it is like your council members, it is your neighborhood councils even, that are controlling a lot of the things that have made the city so unlivable for so long. So yeah, I definitely would encourage that.
I will also add, on top of the community gardens and farms that are necessary, again, there's, like everyone's mentioned, there are many different, it's multifaceted, it's multi-pronged to meet this need. And one way that we at HopeNet approach that is our partners, our 12 food pantry partners, are mostly faith-based congregations. So they're, faith-based churches and synagogues and temples that distribute the food to anyone, people from all kinds of different backgrounds, faith backgrounds, socioeconomical backgrounds. And so I think that these faith-based congregations play an important part in this, because they are hubs within our community to get to meet needs and to serve our community.
And I want to add, like, thank you for mentioning that, Brandy. I think it's really important to identify these places in our neighborhoods and communities that we already have relationships with. And I think it's important what Asher brought up about local politics. And also, I don't think we have to stop there. Like, I think that we, on our own, regardless of what's happening politically, we can ourselves organize and build relationships and build these networks. And take care of ourselves on our own. We don't have to wait for politicians or anyone to come and help us, because if we go their route, it will take a really long time. So I think always, like, don't neglect the power of you and your neighbors and your friends coming together. And I'm sure many of you know about the community fridges that are around the city. And I think they're a really excellent example of a decentralized mutual aid network that's super DIY and is getting food to a lot of people.
That's very awesome to hear. I think this kind of ties in. We have a question from Shirsty, who asked that, Emily, you mentioned previously that one goal is to give people the agency to have a choice on what they eat. So what are some things that help work towards this goal?
I think to start, like, including people's voices where in these conversations, I think that's probably the best place to start. And I think long-term, it's like having those people who are most immediately affected guiding the strategies and creation of new systems, right? Like, we're living in a food system, you know, that people say it's broken. We say all the time, like, the system is broken, because we can't believe how oppressive and terrible it is. The system was made to be this way. It's like working how it's meant to serve white supremacy and capitalism. We're going to need to make something totally new. And the people who help really guide that process and make it need to be the people who have been excluded and left out of all the conversations that allowed this system to come into being and flourish for so long. So I see, yeah, that's kind of the first step. And I think, you know, that could be as small as like asking people, you know, taking surveys, like, what foods are you interested in? Do you have the equipment that you need to prepare foods the way you want to? I think that's also going to eventually, like, not eventually, now I think it needs to include like the experience of food workers, like who's growing our food, and are they given the opportunity to like express their needs and be cared for by the system. So yeah, I think the place to start is including the voices that have been left out.
Yeah, I think it's important to listen to the community members who are in need of food. And I think back to my experience of getting to know the pantries and the community members that are attending the pantries. One thing that's come up is like the cultural relevance of food, and it's actually, it was quite like funny to me, because the pantries quite quickly learned that they, depending on the community they are serving, whether it's, you know, we have one pantry that serves mostly an Armenian population or a Korean population or whatever else may be, that they had to change the type of rice that they were ordering, because people would literally leave like the bags of rice there at the pantry because they didn't want it because it wasn't the right rice, or the type of protein that it was, whether it was, you know, we have an Islamic center who doesn't handle pork or doesn't serve pork, or if one population really prefers chicken versus beef. So I think it's important, like Emily said, to listen to the community members. And we are a, you know, mostly federally funded organization. And so I think it's easy, you know, we get the money from the federal government who says, give out this food. And so, you know, we have this certain type of rice and we're expected to meet the requirements of our federal grant to give out this rice. But we have to advocate for community members and say, we actually want this other rice, we actually want this other protein because it's important to our community members. So it's not just about meeting that federal requirement, but also including our community members' voices so that they're getting not just food, but the food they want, and that meets their cultural needs.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty obvious thing, right? But you'd be surprised how many decisions are made by nonprofits, government agencies, whatever, without actually talking to the end users. And it's pretty baffling if you like see some of the decisions that are made and like the consequences.
Right. I think there's like it's almost like a disconnect of, again, of that immediate need, or it's like if someone's hungry, they think, they'll take any rice. And that's kind of, again, what Emily said, kind of relinquishing some of that agency, kind of dehumanizing eating and what people prefer, when it doesn't take that much to ask, what is it you would like? What do you like to eat? What do you want to eat? And it actually isn't that much effort either to then provide that instead of this standardized ration that's provided to meet a federal requirement.
All right, and with that, we are concluding our Q&A session. So thank you to all the speakers once again. We really appreciate you taking the time to share with us, and we've been able to learn a lot more on the current situation of food insecurity, as well as some actual items we can do to alleviate some of the issues surrounding it. I know the community garden aspect was a really interesting idea that I did not previously know about. So it's great that we are able to hear new insight as to how we can help with the current situation. And thank you to our audience members as well for coming out to our event tonight. I hope you enjoyed it and are able to take away at least one new or interesting fact. Feel free to message Bruin Shelter on any of our platforms if you have any questions about anything at all. And check us out on bruinshelter.org for how you can join our cause. We would also really appreciate it if you guys could fill out the feedback form sent in the chat. So let me close that link for any suggestions on how we can improve, or also any topics that you would like to see on future panels. And with that, we are concluding our panel. Thank you all for coming.